Welcome to Revenge Chronicles, where family secrets meet their reckoning. Whether you're a returning viewer who knows that blood doesn't always mean loyalty, or someone new discovering that sometimes the most courageous act is walking away, today's story will remind you that protection comes in many forms. Let me share a tale about a grandmother who discovered that some battles are worth every sacrifice. I thought I knew what silence cost until I watched my husband's hand connect with my 6-year-old granddaughter's face. The sound echoed through our kitchen like a gunshot, and in that moment, 43 years of my own carefully constructed quiet shattered completely. Emma had spilled orange juice on his newspaper. That was it. A simple accident that any normal person would clean up with a paper towel and maybe a gentle reminder to be more careful. But Robert wasn't normal, and I'd spent decades pretending otherwise. "You clumsy little brat," he snarled at her, and I watched my granddaughter's bright smile crumble into the same fearful expression I'd worn for most of my adult life. "Can't you do anything right?" I should have moved. Should have stepped between them. Should have done what I'd failed to do for my own children 30 years ago. Instead, I stood frozen by the sink, dish towel in my trembling hands, watching history repeat itself in the worst possible way. Emma's mother, my daughter Sarah, had dropped both kids off for their weekly overnight visit while she worked a double shift at the hospital. 8-year-old Marcus sat at the table, his small body rigid with the kind of hypervigilance I recognized too well. He was already learning to disappear, just like his uncle David had, just like Sarah had, just like I had. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," Emma whispered, her voice so small it broke something fundamental inside my chest. "I didn't mean to." "Sorry doesn't fix anything," Robert snapped, reaching for his belt. "Maybe you'll remember next time." That's when something inside me finally broke free. Not broke down, broke free. 43 years of accepting the unacceptable, of making excuses, of believing his promises that he'd change, of thinking I deserved it, of convincing myself that staying was somehow noble, all of it dissolved in the face of my granddaughter's terror. "Stop." The word came out stronger than I'd spoken to him in decades. "Don't you dare touch her." Robert turned toward me, his face darkening with the familiar rage I'd learned to navigate like dangerous weather. "Excuse me." I said stop. I moved between him and Emma, my heart hammering against my ribs. "She's a child. She made a mistake. And mistakes have consequences," he said, his voice dropping to that low, threatening tone that used to make me immediately apologize and retreat. "Something you never learned to teach properly." Behind me, I could feel Emma trembling. Marcus had gone completely still, his eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from seeing the impossible. Grandma was standing up to Grandpa. The natural order of their small world was shifting beneath their feet. "The only mistake here is mine," I said quietly. "For letting this happen for so long." What followed was the longest night of my life. After Robert stormed out to his workshop, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sat with both children at the kitchen table. Emma climbed into my lap, still sniffling, while Marcus remained carefully positioned where he could watch both the door and my face. "Grandma," Marcus said finally, "is Grandpa gonna hurt you when we leave?" The question hit me like cold water. This 8-year-old boy was already strategizing around adult violence, already feeling responsible for consequences beyond his control. I recognized the pattern because I'd lived it, and because I'd watched my own children navigate the same impossible calculations. "No, sweetheart," I told him, though we both knew I couldn't guarantee that. "Grandpa and I need to have some grown-up conversations." That night, after I tucked them both into the guest room, Emma curled against Marcus like they were still in the womb together. I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at my life for the first time in years. The house was silent except for the ticking of the anniversary clock Robert had given me 20 years ago. 20 years when I thought he'd changed. When the bruises had stopped appearing on my arms and the verbal abuse had softened to what I told myself was just his way. When I'd convinced myself that age had mellowed him, that our grandchildren would only see the grandfather who brought them gifts and took them fishing. I'd been so wrong. And my silence had given him new victims. The next morning, I called Sarah before she finished her shift. "Honey, I need you to come get the kids earlier today." "Is everything okay, Mom?" The concern in her voice told me everything. She already suspected. Maybe she'd always suspected, the way I'd suspected about Robert's father when Robert was young. The way patterns pass down like heirlooms nobody wants but everyone inherits anyway. "We'll talk when you get here." When Sarah arrived, both children ran to her with the kind of desperate relief I remembered from my own childhood visits to my grandmother's house. The one place where raised voices didn't automatically signal danger. I waited until Robert left for his Saturday golf game, then sat my daughter down and told her everything. Not just about yesterday, but about the 43 years of yesterday that had led us here. About the bruises she might have seen and forgotten, about the walking on eggshells that had become our family's natural rhythm, about the way her father had learned to throw things just close enough to heads to be threatening but not quite connecting. "Mom," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you ever leave?" It was the question I'd asked myself 10,000 times, the question that had 10,000 answers and no good one. Because I was afraid. Because I thought it was normal. Because he made me believe I deserved it. Because leaving seemed impossible, and staying seemed like what wives were supposed to do. But you telling me now? Because staying was my choice to make when it was just me. It's not my choice to make when it's them. If you're finding strength in this story of breaking cycles and protecting the innocent, please subscribe to Revenge Chronicles. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones that remind us when enough is truly enough. That afternoon, while Robert was still at the golf course, I did something I'd never done in 4 decades of marriage. I packed a bag. Not just an overnight bag for a cooling-off period, not a dramatic gesture meant to bring him to his senses, but a real bag for a real departure. I called my sister Janet, who lived 3 states away and had been begging me to visit for years. "Janet, I need to come stay with you for a while. Maybe a long while." "Of course, honey." What happened? I finally woke up. When Robert came home that evening, sunburned and satisfied with his golf game, he found me sitting at the kitchen table with my suitcase beside my chair and a manila folder spread in front of me. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, eyeing the suitcase with the kind of dismissive amusement reserved for women who'd tried to leave before and always come back. "Divorce papers," I said simply. "I filed them yesterday." His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then rage. "You can't be serious. After 43 years, you're going to throw away our marriage over a little discipline? Hitting a 6-year-old isn't discipline, Robert. It's assault. That's my granddaughter, and if her mother can't raise her properly, she is not your property." I stood up, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "None of us ever were." "Sit down," he ordered, his voice taking on that commanding tone that had controlled me for decades. "We are not finished talking." "Yes, we are." I picked up my suitcase and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard him following, heard the familiar escalation in his voice that used to send me scrambling to apologize and submit. But I'd already seen what submission cost. I'd seen it in Emma's terrified eyes and Marcus's hypervigilance and Sarah's automatic flinching when he raised his voice. "You can't leave," he called after me. "You have nowhere to go. No money, no job, no life without me." I paused at the doorway and looked back at the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. Where I'd raised children who learned to anticipate violence and accept it as normal. Where I'd convinced myself that love meant endurance rather than joy. "You're right," I told him. "I don't have much. But they deserve better than what I accepted. And it's never too late to break a pattern." The divorce took 8 months. 8 months of living with Janet, of slowly remembering who I'd been before I learned to disappear. 8 months of therapy sessions where I cried for the woman I'd been and the children I'd failed to protect properly the first time around. 8 months of Robert calling, threatening, pleading, promising change that we both knew would last exactly as long as it took me to come home. During those months, Sarah brought the children to visit me twice. Away from Robert's house, away from the tension that had flavored every family gathering for years, they were different children. Emma laughed again. Marcus stopped watching doorways. They both slept through the night without the restless stirring that had become their normal. "You know he's telling everyone you abandoned the family," Sarah told me during one visit. "I know. Most of them believe him. I know that too. Does it bother you?" I thought about it honestly. It bothers me that they'd rather believe I'm selfish than believe he's dangerous. But it doesn't change what I saw, and it doesn't change what needed to happen. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in February. I signed papers that gave me almost nothing. No house, no significant assets, no retirement savings worth mentioning. Robert had been smart about financial control, and I'd been too grateful for peace to pay attention to the details that would matter later. But I had something he couldn't take away. I had my granddaughter's laughter, unguarded and free. I had my grandson's shoulders, no longer permanently tensed for impact. I had my daughter's relief that her children could visit grandma without anxiety medication beforehand. Most importantly, I had the knowledge that the pattern stopped with me. That Emma and Marcus would grow up believing love is gentle and families are safe and grandparents are refuge, not sources of fear. 6 months after the divorce, Sarah called me with news. Dad had a stroke. He's in the hospital. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or revenge, just a profound sadness for all the years wasted on fear and anger. Is he going to be okay? They think so. Mom, he's been asking for you. I know. Are you going to visit? I thought about it. Thought about the man I'd married at 22, who'd seemed so strong and certain when I felt young and lost. Thought about the incremental ways he'd convinced me that his anger was my responsibility and his love was conditional on my compliance. Thought about the children who'd learned to tiptoe around his moods and the grandchildren who might have learned the same lessons if I hadn't finally chosen disruption over peace. No, I said finally. I hope he recovers. I hope he finds peace. But my responsibility now is to the people who need protecting, not the person I need protecting from. Robert did recover, though the stroke changed him. According to family members who still spoke to me, he was quieter now, more dependent on others. There were whispers that maybe I'd been too harsh, that maybe he'd learned his lesson, that maybe I should consider reconciliation. But I'd learned something during those months away. I'd learned that my love didn't require sacrifice of my safety or my grandchildren's well-being. I'd learned that breaking generational patterns is messy and painful and absolutely necessary. I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is refuse to enable its dysfunction. A year later, I moved into a small apartment closer to Sarah and the children. Emma and Marcus stay with me every other weekend now, and those visits are everything I'd hoped family could be. We bake cookies without walking on eggshells. We watch movies without monitoring mood changes. We laugh without checking over our shoulders. Emma is 9 now, and when she spills things, she cleans them up without apology or fear. Marcus is 10, and his shoulders have found their natural position instead of perpetually bracing for impact. They both know they are safe with me, completely and unconditionally safe, in a way that their mother and uncle never got to experience. Sometimes people ask me if I regret leaving. If I miss the security of marriage, the house I'd lived in for decades, the financial stability I gave up. And honestly, some days are hard. Some days I worry about money and feel lonely and wonder if I'm too old to have started over. But then I remember the sound of my granddaughter's face being slapped for spilling juice. I remember the way my grandson watched doorways for escape routes. I remember the choice I made between my comfort and their safety, and I know I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. I broke a pattern that had been passed down through generations like a family recipe nobody wanted, but everyone felt obligated to preserve. It cost me everything familiar, everything financially secure, everything socially acceptable. And it was worth every single sacrifice. Thank you for watching this story about choosing love over loyalty and protection over peace. If you believe that some patterns are meant to be broken, please subscribe to Revenge Chronicles for more stories about the courage it takes to put safety before tradition. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to pass pain to the next generation.